So I just recorded a half an hour video and uploaded it to YouTube, and I'm in the process of just considering the things I was talking about and realizing that I'm still what I set out to do in that video was to get through this Dane Rudhyar stuff. And I guess this is what they call a slow read in the sense that I'm taking a long time to go through this text and do commentary on it as I go through it. And I just want to try to get through a bit more of it before I call it a day. Although it's kind of breaking my rule. I guess I'm kind of doing this thing where I'm just going to do one video a day. Or then maybe to have days off so I don't get too burnt out. But to pace myself, right? But I'm going to at least try to get a bit more through this piece of text here. And I titled the other video "Moral Neutralism in Astrology," which I'm kind of funny because I'm like, is it the right way to label it? Because Dean Rudhyar is talking about good and evil, which is moral, right? It's not just like benefic, malefic. He's talking about good and evil, right? But he's talking about and this whole issue of a neutral astrology, and also the whole issue of World War II, where is it easier to talk about the world as being a kind of a morally neutral place before the Nazis, before Hiroshima, before the Cold War, before all the Vietnam, before all this, like, is it easier to do that in this historical moment when you're, or I mean, he just came out of World War One, which is pretty gnarly too, right? I mean, so whatever. Anyways, I'm gonna get into it. For him who acts according to the true principle of aesthetics, there is no evil, neither is there any good. There is only form or relationship linking all elements into a wholeness which includes light and shadow, crest and trough, emphasis and mere implication, all equally significant, but each with a particular significance of its own, a significance which may be marked either with a minus or a plus sign. In aesthetics, the only evil is the lack of significance. But it does not reside in the thing or the situation. For all things and all situations, being expressions of the moment and of their manifestation, are inherently significant. Lack of significance is due only to a man's inability to perceive significance. Thus there is no evil except ignorance. So all the ups and downs, light and shadow, crest and trough, emphasis and implication are all significant. Each with a particular kind of significance. So the particular significance of things is not neutral. In the same way that if you have a painting that has all these different forms in it, the forms are not neutral because you don't just, unless you have just a blank canvas or a one color, that you have a play of different forms of different things, and these forms that we may, as in our own developed perspective, which is like the king in the castle has developed. You have to understand, from the king of the castle, the king has a vested interest in remaining as the king and having a certain degree of control and having a certain position and having a certain power structure. And it's just inherent in that position that things which are threatening to that position are evil because they will displace that position in favor of another position taking place. But if we're not identified with the king in that position, if we zoom out and watch it like it's Game of Thrones, if we did play it like Game of Thrones and the king is dead and we've got a bunch of different, we've got the Starks and we've got the Lannisters and we've got the Targaryens and we've got blah blah blah, right? You can choose your sides, but in the end of the thing, we're taking a position where we're stepping back and we're watching this drama play out, kind of like a Shakespeare play, which involves things that will involve things like Macbeth has murder in it, right? There's more, and we live in a society where murder is not a morally neutral thing. But in an aesthetic form of art, we don't exclude murder from our art because that's part of the story, right? But there's it treats something which has a moral significance in a way where it doesn't have to be excluded. We don't have to police our art to be, our art has no more murder in it, our art has no things which are offensive in it, our art has no, and actually if you read Byung talks about good entertainment as how entertainment can be used to instill moral messages and stuff. But that's kind of like going against this thing as the basic immorality of art. But the idea that, in a sense, what Rudhyar is saying is that if you make a piece of art, like if a piece of art is itself amoral but is somehow referent to a moral system, that it implies the moral system doesn't have to be in the art for it to be implicated in that piece of art. Because even a piece of art that says, "Hey man, I'm not against the patriarchy. I'm doing my own thing," that still is a referent to the patriarchy, and as such, that still constellates that under the tree, right? The Deleuzian tree of the order is that you have an established order, and then you have a bunch of rebellious, punks that are throwing Molotov's cocktails at it. That being a punk does not in itself, even if you say my whole thing is I'm going to threaten the established order in favor of anarchy, that you're still in a sense affirming it by positioning yourself as being identified as that my identity is formed out of my opposition to this thing which is more stable than this thing has been here before than I has, and will probably likely remain here after I leave, but I'm in turn defining myself in opposition to this thing which has more stability than I do, and in such you are still derivative of this thing even if you are apparently against it, unfortunately. So in some way the anarchists are just in just the same way just the other side of the coin, or it's like the same thing in the Matrix, how the Neo rebellion is coded into the system, and you almost like Uranus is kind of like that with astrology, but it's kind of tricky because Uranus is something that comes out of modernity, right? It comes out of our new technology, and is our modern bias, creating the Uranus signification, right? I don't know. Anyway, so but he says the idea there is no evil except for ignorance, because it's ignorance keeps you into the view of locked into your own castle, and any other castle that's a threat to your castle is evil because it represents something that's not your castle, and so you're in this very small thing. Whereas if we zoom out, we can see that all these different, it would be akin to being like, I'm anything that's not like my star sign is evil, and that you have to be, because I am a philosophical Sagittarius. All you guys who don't get into my Sagittarius philosophy trip are a bunch of jerks or something like that, because you just don't, only Sagittarius is right, because obviously the sun, when I was born, the sun was in Sagittarius, right? So because the sun is the king and the king is in Sag in my chart, then Sag is the king. The whole point of astrology is to get out of this point of view that your own perspective is the only perspective, and that you're living cooperatively with a group of other people, right? And or that there's the 12 signs, that they're all these different relatively valid perspectives, right? And my whole thing about now to bring it back to what the hell why does Deleuzian astrology, what were specifically the anti-Oedipus, what does Deleuze and Guattari's anti-Oedipus have to do with astrology? I'm basically saying that in the astrological system, that there are certain signs that are going to be more have a stronger emphasis on the family dynamic, and I think that in the whole thing of this is what I wanted to get into, which I didn't get into my last video. Okay, now I can actually get into it. I've got an entry point here. Okay, this is how it goes. The sign of Cancer is fundamentally related to childbearing, because for one thing it's related to the breast in the system of relating it to the body parts, and another thing, the moon is kind of almost like an infant child in relationship to the earth. It's almost like the earth is the parent and the moon is little moon baby, and so anything that it relates to the moon, it has this kind of maternal, and also the cycle of women's menstrual periods and stuff like this, right? Now, from a Deleuzian point of view, okay, this is where I'm never getting good. Okay, the whole tensions between Deleuzian philosophy and astrology. First of all, if you look at this construction of there is a biological fact of the lunar cycle with the human female and her reproductive cycles, it is true, right? But if we, for a moment, we are so enveloped and wrapped into our experience as these people in these flesh bags who have biological impulses to reproduce and have babies and all this kind of stuff, and that impulse is also linked in with our we don't want to die, we want to keep living, we want to keep surviving, and we want to be comfortable, and we want to keep our family comfortable, and all these kinds of drives. And so if somebody has good Cancer placements, they're like, or placements which are friendly to the moon, if you have good lunar Cancer familial placements, there is a natural tendency towards appealing to this sentiment of doing things that are comfortable in a familial way and stuff like this. And if there are other examples, like a moon in Taurus is the sensual, the comforts of the body and all this kind of stuff, the Taurus things like this are going to be helpful for all this kind of stuff. And then, in contrast to this, the Capricorn sets itself as a polarity against Cancer, right? And so the Capricorn placements may have more of a struggle with this kind of familial, warm, friendly kind of thing, or there may be a polarity between the warm summer months in the tropical system of Cancer, the summer solstice, and the winter solstice, the cold and the hot, and we have a natural inborn biological appreciation for the sun and having vitamin D and warm climates and stuff like this, and that we tend to not like the winter, and we tend to not like cold, damp weather and all this kind of stuff. And so there's what I'm trying to say about the neutrality of moral neutrality is that seasons are not human things; they are beyond the human, and so a season is not is neutral. But if from the position of a human being wants, if you are invested in your family, and if you're invested in being a mother, a parent, and stuff like that, you naturally want to create a nest, a nice, comfortable, cozy environment for all this kind of stuff to flourish. But then from the position of things like looking at the other signs like Scorpio, if the Scorpio fundamentally represents things like sex and death and survival and things like that, it may not be the most relevant archetype if what you're invested in is building the family nest and stuff like that. But maybe that Scorpio is more appropriate for something else, right? Or that Capricorn is more appropriate for something else. But the thing is, if we look at Gilles Deleuze is a guy who has, I was looking at his chart just briefly, that he has both Venus and Mercury perfectly conjunct in Capricorn, and he's also got Jupiter nearby as well, right? So, and Sun in Capricorn. So he's got a Capricorn stellium, and that his philosophy being the anti-Oedipus, being critical of the preoccupation with familiar. The thing is, to keep in mind is that Deleuze actually had a family. He had a son, and he wasn't like somebody who was avoiding family life, but he was annoyed by the psychological, the tendency in analytic psychology to make it all about developmental psychology in the family, about what happened in early childhood development, and then putting it all on the parents, and then keep it. And the thing is, it's not to say that any of this is false necessarily, but the example which I think we can use, Gabor Mate, who I'm also reading, is a good example, because Gabor Mate, it explicitly puts a lot of emphasis in childhood development and all this kind of stuff, and there's probably science to back it up even, right? But at least Gabor Mate, when telling his own story, he places it in a historical context where he was traumatized from being separated from his mother at a young age as an infant, but it wasn't because his mother was just an insensitive, cruel person, but rather that they were dealing with the Holocaust in World War II. So it's like, by placing it in the historical context means that it's not just all about whether his mother is making the right choices or not. It's about this mother being the choice, the whole importance of Gabor Mate as a budding child ego developing is from the perspective of the self, of the subject in that body is that child, and the mother and their dynamic of the child. It puts a lot of emphasis on the child, that that thing, right? Create, and if you're a psychologist, your job is to specialize in the psychology of individual people who come to you as patients, and you look at individuals and how that individual is formed and all this kind of stuff, right? But when you start to appreciate that the needs of the infant child and the needs of the mother and the needs of the community, which are groups of Jews under serious threat from Nazis and Hungary and World War II and the Holocaust, it's like when you put that in relative context, you realize that the needs of the child are infinitely relativized by all these other different factors, and that the child having its own needs met essentially is a relativistic thing. And in the social programming of that time said that, there's more important things than this child getting its basic bonding needs, so it doesn't have ADHD and when he's an adult or something like this. We have a fucking Holocaust to deal with right now. I'm sorry, but at least if you live through this, that's good. The amount of trauma, whatever, it's like we're gonna be traumatized one way or another. We're gonna have to deal with it, but right now it's survival, right? So, but that's the situation, unfortunately, right? But it's understanding that in the relative context of all these other factors going on, and then when you're looking at a causal factor to blame, that it doesn't just go on the parents, because it's understanding the greater significance of the situation, right? And when we look at astrology. Now, astrology is not something that's fashionable because it's kind of, seen as being woo-woo or something like this, or being a regressive, infantile, magical thinking thing or whatever. And I don't really expect to make much progress with, arguing that rationalistic people should be more into astrology or something. But in the same sense that we can look at astrology as a way to not get stuck. First of all, we have a system which says that we have this whole culture which is built upon selling people things because people are biologically wired to want to reproduce and have kids and have babies, and that we have a system that says that your main drive in life is to do that, so everything that helps you do that is good, and anything that prevents you from doing that is bad, and everything that makes your family happy and blah blah blah. But all it is like, there's something you at some point in time you realize that you and your little kids and your wife and you actually exist in a society that is more than just your nuclear family, right? And that the more you're wrapped up into this thing of a nuclear family, the more kind of isolated you are from the rest of the society. And there's all sorts of things going on that are now unconscious because we're so invested in our little family lives that there's an absence of community. There are epidemics of mental illness, of poverty, of all this kind of stuff, and we're responding to this as a society by going back into a kind of a traditionalism which puts all the emphasis on family life, on this kind of thing, or like this idea, we were comforted by this kind of ideal, or that we're shocked and traumatized, and I think in most cases people are just looking for whatever provides them a sense of safety and security, because people are essentially have wounded children that are looking for whatever energy it is reminds them of creating a safe family home, a safe family dynamic, and all of this is essentially has more to do with creating good conditions for the moon, basically creating good appropriate, like if you have a good Cancer placement, you have a good Taurus placement, then you can create all this stuff and create a situation that makes a good business. However, if you're a fiery hot Sagittarius, like just throwing philosophy out there doesn't achieve the same effect, unfortunately. It's kind of where I'm going with this, right? But as somebody who doesn't really have those kinds of placements to do it the other way, I can't really do it, but I can at least look at people like Henry Miller as a guy who has Capricorn placements and Scorpio placements, and having a different kind of a life path. Now, this is where it gets a bit problematic, unfortunately, because Henry Miller is kind of a bit of a, what can I say, a bit of a womanizer, okay? But and then this kind of brings into this other thing about the whole issue about the culture right now, whether it's about men who are either trying to have a traditional, family life or something like that and be a traditional man or something like that, or men who get pulled into some sort of pickup culture and they just want a bunch of casual sex. But I honestly think the pickup culture is probably people want the trad housewife thing and that they need to go around picking up women to initiate a relationship, and that most men probably don't want to just be dating and being single infinitely. Or I don't know, it's kind of confusing. I don't know what other people are looking for in life, but that the whole thing about these social media influencer guys, are they trying to push you towards a responsible traditional life, or are they trying to encourage you to just be a kind of like the Andrew Tate stuff? It doesn't seem like that's promoting these kind of values to me, right? And that's what I'm kind of confused about the red pill right wing thing, because they're trying to make what they're presenting as masculinity isn't necessarily the same thing as creating a wholesome family environment. It instead seems to be creating a very toxic environment, right? So and at least when I start to approach it like that I can see that I still kind of find this thing more favorable. But then this is what I'm trying to say in my other video about the taking a neutral perspective, is that we were initially biased to be like, do I want to surround myself with sleazy hustler guys, or do I want to surround myself with wholesome family guys? And the wholesome family guys, to me, even if I don't like family stuff, it's a better vibe. I'm not really interested in starting a family, but it's more palatable than those guys, at least, right? So, and the whole point too is that if somebody is even if their message, if what the content of what they're communicating isn't just propaganda for the family life, and there's something more for me to sink my teeth into, then it doesn't really matter if they have a family or not, or what, because I can understand that's not essentially the fundamental thing that they're trying to sell me. Isn't just that they've achieved some kind of lifestyle and that lifestyle will make me happy because it fulfills my basic biological drive or something like that, right? That there's something a bit more substantial than that going on, that I can that it's not just appealing, because I feel like appealing to that is kind of a cheap move to make, because it's kind of course I'm a fucking man. of course I'm a human being. Of course I have needs and stuff like this, right? But it's not, the what I feel is the drive to push towards transcendent ideals, to overcome these things and to see them as to be pulled out by family life in a way as to be pulled out by any other of these 12 forces. That it's one apart taking itself to be the whole, because essentially we are so it's true that everybody is born to a family. A mother is necessary for life to happen, but this is also, does everybody born need to be in a family? No. Has that ever been the case? No. But why is that this thing has become such a totalizing factor in the psyche? Why can't we have why can't we have an astrology that puts Henry Miller on the same footing as everybody that's got the the wholesome family man, upholding Christian values and traditions or something like that? That is Henry Miller necessarily? Is Henry Miller such an antagonistic force, or can we relativize Henry Miller and as everything else and put it together as a different places on the mandala that we visit, and that ultimately we're the point is that we're liberated, because in the whole realm of human expression, that is certain. There's a certain in Hamlet, right, that we take on different masks and we take on different roles, and that in one mode that we're living this life and we're doing this thing, and then life will change and we'll find ourselves living another life and doing another thing. And the beauty of the human experience is that it can take so many forms and it can take so many different shapes, and that it's true that the family is a basic mode of perpetuating the human life form. But if you look at the population rates of and the growth of during this time of this tremendous acceleration and stuff like that in the post-war period, that of tremendous technological acceleration, tremendous acceleration of knowledge and information, tremendous acceleration of reproduction, of libido, and the empowerment of the human being to reproduce, and the things we need to relativize our own existence as being a very small into the cosmic picture of things, that the human and the if we were to say we were fish, for example, it's Pisces season. If we were fish and we had the same biological reproductive drive, that we would be, instead of having sexual intercourse, imagine this. Imagine all our attachment to human sexual intercourse, and imagine you find yourself in a body of a fish, and you're supposed to have the same drive to fertilize these eggs, but it's going to happen completely external to your body in pools of water, that you are just going to fertilize eggs, and you're not even going to have any direct contact with them at all. But you're nonetheless motivated in such a way that you're going to push yourself up a river in the opposite direction against the stream, and you're just gonna throw yourself on these rocks like crazy, and you're not even gonna get to have sex. You're just gonna be fertilizing loose eggs out there. It's ridiculous, right? And so in the same, there's this basic energy to do that. That's part of life, but it's kind of like in the sense of, if there's anything that spirituality is about, is to understand that there's other life forms out there that also have these drives, that might view, how is a fish going to view us for astrology? Is a fish going to have the same, is this fish going to have the same needs for familial comfort that a human does? What I'm trying to say is that the planets are these things which are not humans. The planets are... what our human life is a form of life that's probably actually very small in relation to these forces that we perceive from the limitations of our own human perception and our own human experience, that we can only perceive these forces in such a way that they're only relevant to our human lives in such a way. But as we see ourselves as being actors in larger systems with other animals, other diverse species and diverse intelligences, that we can see that our own human needs for familial life and having comfortable family things are actually could be very selfish, and that what makes you and little baby happy at home may be in competition with all sorts of other forces. And the point, what I've noticed is that what happens in the Western psyche in young white men and stuff like that is that they kind of take this attitude that of growing up, that whatever is good, that they get the attention from mommy and it's good. They get what they want and it's good. The family is safe and it's good. And anything that is threatening this basic structure is evil, because it represents a basic threat to the safety and familiarity and security and all that is established, and that is defined as evil. And so what you end up is getting a bunch of stuck-up, xenophobic, racist white guys, because anything that looks different to them is evil. Anything that tastes different than what we usually eat is evil. Everything that is foreign is evil, because they are completely just like, my own family keeps me safe and keeps me happy, and then everything else is just bad stuff, right? And I'm just concerned about this because I don't want to, I don't know, whatever. I don't like being stuck with my family. I'd rather get out there. I'd rather, be in the world and be mixing and whatever, mixing up all sorts of different people. I'm really not interested in having any of these conversations with my own family. Ugh. And, let alone being stuck in that. I don't know. Like, it doesn't not motivate me to just repeat this. I don't know. I'm not really interested in starting a family either, I guess I could say, but I'm not interested in doing my astrology channel into just like being about family stuff, right? Even if maybe that would sell, maybe it would sell to make it all about family stuff, or about achieving some sort of, independence from this stupid family situation or something, right? But that's all about how am I supposed, selling things to people who are like their main thing of what their whole desire complex of what they spend money on and what they want is linked into this biological thing, and to be a heteronormative reproducer and all, or stuff like this. And then either that, or I don't know how to sell things to queer people either, apparently. So I don't know. This is it's kind of my own economic pressure dealing with the situation creatively anyways, right? So this is another half-hour ramble. Hopefully you guys like this one too.